If you go from there, David goes from strength to strength. He defeats the Philistines, becomes a friend of Saul's son, Jonathan, marries Saul's daughter, Michal, and he goes out against the Philistines, and it's said of him, Saul has slain his thousands, but David his tens of thousands. And as a result of this, he has a place in the king's court. He's one of the in-crowd, if you like. He's certainly lauded by the people, by everybody else. He's got everything going for him. But unfortunately, in that phrase, Saul is slain his thousands, David his tens of thousands, he rouses the jealousy of King Saul. And Saul maybe has some understanding that the kingdom has departed from him, and that it's now gone to David. And he becomes David's enemy. And Saul becomes jealous of him. He tries to kill him, hurls his spear at him while he's playing his harp, tries to turn Jonathan against him. Jonathan doesn't, because Jonathan remains loyal to David. And he tells Jonathan that if you don't turn against David, then David's going to take your place as the king after I die. And as a result of all this, David becomes a fugitive, and he ends up in the cave of Adullam. 1 Samuel chapter 22, verse 1 says, Therefore David departed from there and escaped to the cave of Adullam. So when his brothers and all his father's house heard of it, they went down there to him. And everyone who was in distress, everyone who was in debt, and everyone who was discontented gathered to him. So he became captain over them. And there were about 400 men with him. So David goes out and he becomes the leader of a rebel band of fugitives. Far from being the favored insider, he's now the outsider. Saul seeks him. Saul seeks to kill him or to remove him. He has a number of adventures and near escapes, but he stays alive. And throughout all this time, he also stays faithful to God. You see that David seeks God. When he has the opportunity to kill King Saul, he says he won't touch the Lord's anointed. He won't sin against God by touching the Lord's anointed, because the Lord has anointed Saul as king, and he's not going to sin against him by taking his life. And so David acts in some distress, but also continues to act with faith to the Lord. So then we're going to come to our second encounter, which comes back to the verse which we started with. Go to chapter 26, we find that, again, David is on the run, Saul is seeking him, and Saul encamps in a place where he goes to sleep. And David comes down to the camp, and in 26 verse 7, we see that David and Abishai came to the people by night, and there Saul lay sleeping within the camp with his spear stuck in the ground in his head. And Abner and all the people lay around him. Then Abishai said to David, God has delivered your enemy into your hand this day. Now therefore please let me strike him at once with the spear right to the earth, and I will not have to strike him a second time. But David said to Abishai, do not destroy him, for who can stretch out his hand against the Lord's anointed and be guiltless? David said, therefore, as the Lord lives, the Lord shall strike him, or his day shall come to die, and he shall go out in the battle. The Lord forbid that I should stretch out my hand against the Lord's anointed. Please take now the spear and the jug of water that by his head, and let us go. So Abishai says to David, look, you've got him cornered now. He's asleep. Everyone around him is asleep. There's a sword there. Take the spear, put it through his head, and you're free. David says, no, I'm not going to do that. That would be sinful. I'm not going to touch the Lord's anointed. And what he does, he then wakes up Saul, shows him the spear and the jug of water, and he says, look, I could have killed you, Saul. I didn't do that. So why are you chasing after me? I don't seek your life. Why do you seek my life? I'm just like a flea, he says. Don't come after me. And apparently Saul has a change of heart. Go to the end of the chapter. See that verse 21, and Saul said, I have sinned, return my son David. I will harm you no more, because my life was precious in your eyes this day. Indeed, I have played the fool and erred exceedingly. So it seems that Saul has changed his mind. He says, come back, it's all right. I won't go after you anymore. So up to now, David has followed the Lord. He's done what God told him. And it appears that Saul has said he's not going to go after him anymore. Now, that's the next bit I want to concentrate for the rest of this talk. Go to chapter 27. David does something very strange. You think he might say, well, okay, it's all right now, I can go back and live with Saul. But what does he do? Verse 27 then said, David said in his heart, now I shall surely perish someday by the hand of Saul. There's nothing better for me than I should speedily escape to the land of the Philistines, and Saul will despair of me to seek me any more in any part of Israel, so I shall escape out of his hand. And David arose and went over with 600 men that were with him to Achish, the son of Maoch, king of Gath. And David dwelt with Achish in Gath, he and his men, each man with his household, and so on. And verse 4, it said, it was told Saul that David had fled to Gath, so he sought him no more. It says there that Saul says he sought him no more. So David actually had some inkling that perhaps Saul hadn't really changed his mind, and that Saul was unreliable, as some world leaders are today. They may be saying one thing one day and then they'll say the next thing the next day. And so David departs and he flees to the land of the Philistines. Now, one of the things you notice if you follow through the story from verse 27 through to chapter 30, which we're going to look at in a moment, during this time, David never seeks the Lord. There's no mention of God. There's no mention of praying to God. And what David does now, he goes over to the Philistines. He goes and lives with the Philistines. He's now actually living with the enemy, the enemies of Israel. Even more strange, if you go to verse 28, chapter 28, he goes on a raid with the Philistines. Then in chapter 28 it says, now it happened in those days that the Philistines gathered their armies together for war to fight with Israel. And Achish said to David, you assuredly know that you will go out with me to battle and your men. So David said to Achish, surely you know what your servant can do. So Achish said to David, therefore I make you one of my chief guardians forever. Can you see how strange that is? Really strange behavior. He's not only now with the Philistines, he's actually going out to battle with the Philistines against Israel. He's in the enemy camp. He's fighting with the enemy. How can this possibly happen? What's happened to David? The one who's slain the Philistines, now he's fighting with the Philistines. Really strange behavior. He's gone from being the one who confronted the Philistines in the name of the living God to being with them. And as I said, if you look through this section of the book of Samuel, you'll find that at no point does David seek the Lord. So he goes off with the Philistines. The Philistines actually tell him, sorry, you can't go with us. We know who you are. Maybe when you enter the battle, you'll turn against us. And he goes back to his place, which he's been given, a place called Ziklag, which incidentally is not far from Gaza today, where he set up his camp. We get to verse 30, chapter 30, verse 1. Now it happened when David and his men came to Ziklag on the third day that the Amalekites had invaded the south, and Ziklag attacked Ziklag and burned it with fire, and had taken captive the women and those who were there, from small to great. They did not kill anyone, but carried them away and went their way. So David and his men came to the city, and there it was, burned with fire, and their wives, their sons, and their daughters had been taken captive. And David and the men who were with him lifted up their voices and wept until they had no more power to weep. And David's two wives, Ahinoam the Jezreelitess and Abigail, the widow of Nabal the Carmelite, had been taken captive. Now David was greatly distressed, for the people spoke of stoning him, because the soul of all the people was grieved, every man for his sons and daughters. Let's leave it there for the moment. Okay, David now has reached the lowest point in this story. He's trusted in the Philistines. He's set up his camp in a place called Ziklag. And while he's away, the Amalekites, who are the big enemies of Israel, live further south from the Philistines even. They've come and captured his town. He's taken his wives and his family captive. and all the people who are with him have gone into captivity, and he's lost everything. Must have been a terrible day for David. Very bad. He's lost everything. Disaster has struck. And even now, all the people who are with him are turning against him and talking about stoning him to death. So at this point, David's got to make a choice. He could say, well, that's it, I'm finished. Okay, stone me to death, I've lost everything. But what does he do? It says, David strengthened himself in the Lord. So this is the first mention you have of David doing anything to do with the Lord from chapter 26 right through to this point. And everything's gone wrong for him. He's ended up in the enemy camp. He's lost everything. And then it says he strengthened himself in the Lord. He turned to the Lord. So, in all these chapters, there's been no mention of David looking to the Lord. Now he looks to the Lord. So the David who came before Goliath, proclaiming his faith in the living God and winning victory over the enemies of Israel, not once mentioned God in these chapters. Lost everything. Didn't work out. His plan to go to the Philistines. Lost everything, and he's in danger of losing his life. He's about to be stoned to death. So he encourages himself in the Lord. And the next verse it says, then David, verse 7, then David said to Abiathar, the priest, Ahimelech's son, please bring the ephod here to me. And David brought the ephod to David. So David inquired of the Lord, saying, shall I pursue this troop? Shall I overtake them? And he answered him, pursue, for you shall surely overtake them, and without fail recover all. Isn't the Lord gracious? He could have said, David, you've blown it. I've forgotten with you. You've lost everything. You've gone over to the wrong side. Forget it. But David encourages himself in the Lord, and he seeks the Lord. He seeks the Lord with the ephod. That's the way by which they determine the will of the Lord in the Old Testament. And the Lord says to him, go after this troop. You shall overtake them and recover all. He prays to God, and God answers him and tells him what to do. He may have lost everything in the physical realm, but he remembers that there is a spiritual realm where he was once very powerful, linked to the living God. Maybe some of us can get into such a state as well. We've known the Lord's presence, and then we depart and we begin to backslide and go away from the Lord. Maybe we think it's all over, we've lost it. But if we turn to the Lord and ask God to help us, ask God to meet us in our point of need, he's there and he will meet us at our point of need. The Lord says, you will surely overtake them and without fail recover all. And he then goes with his 600 men who are with him and came to the brook Besor. Crosses over the brook and finds an Egyptian, a slave of the Amalekites, been left behind without food or water. They give this man food and water, and he's able to direct them to the place where the people are held captive, and then David and his men recover all that's lost. He comes to the brook Besor. Probably most of you don't know any Hebrew, but if you do know the Hebrew, you may know that the word Besor actually means something. It means good news. In fact, the Hebrew term for the gospel is Besorat Yeshua HaMashiach, the gospel, the good news of Jesus the Messiah. So he comes to the brook Besor and he gets some good news, the way he's going to find the answer. When we come to the end of ourselves and we realize that everything's gone wrong, we come to the good news that there is a God in heaven who loves us, who gave us Yeshua, Jesus the Messiah. And we come to him and he's able to help us to recover what we have lost. And he does so. Crosses over the brook Besor, good news, and he recovers everything that's lost, both the people and the goods. Returns them to his people. Then he learns that Saul has died in battle, goes up to Hebron, claims the kingdom, and gains control. In the following chapters, you read how there was a long war between the house of Saul and the house of David, but David grew stronger and stronger, and the house of Saul became weaker and weaker. House of Saul representing the flesh, the house of David representing now the spirit, becomes stronger and stronger, and David ends up uniting the whole country and the kingdom under him, becoming Israel's greatest king and the ancestor of the Messiah. And it all turned on that one verse. David encouraged himself in the Lord. If he hadn't done so, he'd have been dead and forgotten. The disaster which had befallen him jolted him out of his backslidden state and unbelief, which had caused him to end up in the camp of the enemy. He obeyed the Lord, came to the brook Besor, good news, and began to recover all that was lost.